Product provided by Nintendo. Typically on this channel, I try to prioritize topics that are more research intensive, that'll teach you more about Nintendo or the industry as a whole that you may have not known otherwise that relate even loosely to Nintendo. Today though, I want to do something a little bit different and just talk about the games that I think are the best of the best on Nintendo Switch as of right now. And to make this a little bit more structured, I'm going to break all of it down into three main categories. 1. Best primarily in handheld mode. 2. Best in primarily docked mode. And 3. Best of both worlds, games that I play pretty much equally across the two modes. Feel free to leave your current favorite Switch games and I'll be sure to check them out. A great handheld game in my mind should consist of any combination of these key characteristics. I'd even go as far as to say that it needs to have at least one of them to be worth playing for any real time in handheld mode. It should be a primarily single player experience, or at the very least enjoyable as one. It should be a game that's digestible in bite-sized play sessions. It shouldn't be too dependent on dexterity, and it's a plus if the graphics translate well to the smaller, lower quality screen. On Switch, there's a good amount of games that could fit in this category. Too many for this video to be sure, so I'm going to highlight the ones that I spent a good amount of time with and or see myself spending more time with in the future. Stardew Valley is a game that I didn't expect to like. I don't typically gravitate toward the slow, methodical, more mundane games when I'm looking for something new to play. But for whatever reason, Stardew Valley just hooked me. Well, on second thought, that completely accidental pun reminded me this game initially caught my attention strangely enough because of the crazy amount of people I saw online complaining about how hard it is to fish. I took that as a personal challenge and spent the $15 to find that I actually found it to be fun and relaxing to fish, and eventually the game as a whole. It does a great job of giving you a lot to do while being lenient enough to allow you to accomplish all, some, or even none of that at your own pace. I did not play this game effectively when I first started, but the beauty of it is ultimately it didn't matter. You always have the time to do the tasks that are laid out before you, so you always have room to grow into the farmer, fisherman, miner, or forager the game wants you to be. As if that wasn't enough, the game's developer does an excellent job at supporting it post-launch. Online and local co-op was added by way of a free content update, and it's been confirmed that we'll be seeing more of them in the future. Boxboy and Boxgirl is another game that's extremely easy to digest in bite-sized sessions. And to stay on theme with the primarily handheld mode games I've recommended so far, Cuphead is a game that I fantasized about coming to Switch ever since Studio MDHR announced it back in 2014. And now that it's here, I've been exclusively playing it in handheld mode. Seriously, I've never docked this game even once. Now I know that I said that a good mark of a great handheld game is something that doesn't require a lot of dexterity, and Cuphead is probably a game that you may think requires a ton, but I'd argue that Cuphead is less about dexterity and more about pattern recognition, something that could honestly be done surprisingly passively in handheld mode. It didn't take me very long to catch up to my Xbox save, where I made it to the second aisle and beat the first two bosses there. It only took a few short play sessions on Switch, and I'm infinitely more likely to finish this game in a setting like that. Handheld mode is great for grinding in any game, and Cuphead for me is all about the grind, so I'd recommend it on Switch for that reason alone. It also helps a lot that the game lost absolutely nothing in its transition from Xbox to Switch. And to make things even better, much like Stardew Valley, this is another game that will be receiving more content in the future. We've already been confirmed for additional content later this year. Boxboy and Boxgirl is another game that's extremely easy to digest in bite-sized sessions. And to stay on theme with the primarily handheld mode games I've recommended so far, you get a lot of value out of it with it being priced at $9.99 on the eShop, which I say is an excellent price for a game with over 200 levels to clear. The game adheres to the design principle Nintendo is famous for, that's essentially boiled down to introduce players to a game mechanic and continue to ramp up the level design around that mechanic. In Boxboy and Boxgirl, you're eased into puzzles that limit you to a specific number of blocks, then given obstacles to overcome within those parameters. Those parameters increase and increase until they move on to the next mechanic, which will not only follow that rationale, but also work in concepts that were previously touched on in earlier levels and even worlds. To add to that, you can play with a friend in local co-op, which I wouldn't say is ideal for handheld mode, but I mean, it's there and it's fun, so if that's something you're into, go for it. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily end there. There are plenty of games that you can play primarily in handheld mode, and plenty more that I personally prefer to play mostly in handheld mode. Some other choice games for me off the top of my head would have to be Celeste, Ape Out, Katana Zero, and Super Meat Boy. Chances are most of the retro-styled indie titles would fit the bill pretty nicely here. There are also plenty of AAA games that play great in handheld mode, but I'd probably mostly put them in the best of both category. Docked mode has a different set of use cases for me. I tend to prioritize it when playing games that rely heavily on motion controls, are multiplayer focused, or that don't otherwise fit the bill for the handheld requirements that I talked about in that section. This doesn't mean that, gun to my head, I wouldn't play these games in handheld mode. It just means that when given the choice, I prefer to play docked. Splatoon is the franchise that sold me on the practicality that motion can have in games when done well. The experience borderline requires it in the same way that most PC shooters borderline require keyboard and mouse. You'll be fighting an uphill battle against competent players if you confine yourself to the stick controls. It's mostly for this reason that I exclusively play this game in docked mode. Using motion to aim on the screen that you need to engage with the action taking place on is uncomfortable. Not impossible, mind you, but far from ideal. Outside of that though, I'd just recommend this game generally if you haven't played before and you consider yourself to be a fan of Nintendo games as well as shooters on any level. The action of shooting and swimming in the ink to refill as well as retreat from fire or even approach an enemy is a major contributor to the fun of this game, and that's all supported by great level design that translates well both in the meat of the game, i.e. the competitive online multiplayer, Salmon Run, Splatoon's Horde mode equivalent, and its single player content, of which there's been more added through DLC. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a game that I don't feel I need to explain. It's the best iteration and one of the best franchises in gaming, bar none. Double Dash fans can fight me if they want, but we all know in our hearts that this game is the result of 2 decades of refinement and is the current peak of the series. Honestly, this game could pretty easily translate well in handheld mode and should probably be in the best of both section, but I think there is one thing that changes that. A lot of people likely primarily play it with friends locally, and it's just one of the best looking games on the platform even now and should be appreciated as such. That is all. Moving on. Pokmon Let's Go, as controversial as it may be, is a game that I think all longtime Pokemon fans owe it to themselves to experience. Whether that be as an on-ramp for a sibling, a friend, or even significant other that you hope to get into the series just in time for Pokemon Sword and Shield, or for yourself to see how Game Freak changed the world we all know so well. There's a good amount of Easter eggs and nods that I think most longtime fans of the IP would appreciate. I played this almost entirely in docked mode for 2 major reasons, with the first one being less of a practical thing and more because up until this point, it wasn't possible to natively play through a full Pokemon game on the TV. The second reason is the Pokeball Plus, which I enjoyed using both because it was a neat bit of immersion and because I found it to be both more comfortable and accurate than the Joy-Con overall. It certainly wasn't perfect. I had orientation problems while fiddling with the Pokeball in my hand, but for the most part, it was better than using motion with the Joy-Con. This last category is where my favorite of all these games tend to fall, and honestly, they're all probably best suited for docked mode, but the thing that I would say separates them the most from games that I primarily play in docked mode is that 1, they're addictive, and the controls are done well enough that it's not cumbersome to play them in handheld mode when the need is there. Breath of the Wild was an immediate prestige piece for Nintendo Switch. For many, including most of you I'm sure, it spawned hundreds of hours of experimentation and discovery. I was no exception. In fact, I'd say it was the last game I dumped that much time into consistently before Smash Bros. Ultimate came out. But I'll get to Smash, so put a pin in that. This is is a must play for anyone with the Switch, and it should be looked at as inspiration by developers working on open world games for years to come. It was the perfect game to drive the hybrid concept home for me. I'll never forget the moment I had in my first session playing this game when I initially got my Nintendo Switch. Logan walked over to me and asked if I wanted to ride with him to go to the store or whatever, and I had a realization that I could do that and still play the game. That's something that made this a hybrid game for me immediately. Just wanting to play it for that much longer, even when on a more traditional console I would have to save the game and come back to playing later. To be honest with you though, Super Mario Odyssey was a game that I loved just a tad bit more. That said, unlike Zelda, the thing that mostly made this a hybrid game for me wasn't this undying need to play it more. For Mario, it was more about the way moons are dispersed everywhere in the game. I played mostly in dock mode. For the first 100 or so moons needed to beat the main story because I did prefer to use the motion control gestures to control Cappy, but the handheld play ramped up for me when I was grinding for the remaining moons. It had that pick up and play experience that I talked about in the handheld part of this video, where I would turn the game on, get a few moons, and then turn it off. And unlike Breath of the Wild, it didn't evolve into being a scavenger hunt for a beeping sound on a radar. I naturally came upon the moons I needed to get through the game, and most of them were fun to get because they required some level of interaction with the game's mechanics, and the experience of getting them varied more for me than Zelda shrines and Korok seeds. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is easily my favorite game on the Switch. I'm sure I've made this clear on my videos, on other channels, on Twitter, all over the internet. So if you've been following me in this channel for long enough, it should come as no surprise to you that it's in this video. Some people though may be surprised that I recommend playing this game at all in handheld mode, let alone even remotely close to how much you should play it in docked mode. But I find myself playing it undocked more and more as time goes on. I find it's a good way to lab out combos. I use it a lot in matches when I drop in on a friend stream of the game. I've been using it a lot in battle arenas with friends and random people alike, and when I'm editing these videos while I wait for a render, asset import, or exporting the finished product, I'm probably playing Smash. Much like Cuphead, Smash Brothers for me is a lot about pattern recognition. Even against actual people, everyone falls into a pattern of some sort, and if you can figure it out, crazy amounts of precision isn't necessary. Docked is for that super challenging set against a character or player I struggle against, or if I ever decide to venture into the cesspool that is Elite Smash. And those are all of my favorite games to play on Switch, categorized by my favorite way to play them. What are your favorite games to play, and how do you like to play them most? Also, do you think this new boost mode will affect that at all if it's implemented into those games? Let me know that and more in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to click like and share it with a friend that maybe just got a Switch and is looking for new games to play. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for new videos like this every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.